Okay, good morning. My name is Ryan Dividock. I'm the supervisor for the Planning, Zoning, and Land Use Unit within the Planning and Local Business Development Division here in Oakland County. Welcome to today's virtual planners gathering, Oakland County Regional Housing Partnership and Zoning Reform. Michigan's first statewide housing plan was adopted by MSHDA in 2022, and it notes that Oakland County has a backlog of existing and forecasted housing demand. So today we're going to explore the topic a bit further, hear what's being done, and highlight some tools that can help. So just a few reminders before we get started. The meeting is being recorded and it will be made available on our website. If you have any questions, please use the chat function in Zoom and direct your question to Jim Schaefer. Jim will moderate a question and answer session after the presentations have completed. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We have Jacob Wilson from Pontiac Community Foundation, Vern Gustafson from Pontiac Housing Commission, Leah Dumichel from Michigan Association of Planning, and Ryan Kilpatrick with Flywheel Companies. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for having us today. As Ryan said, my name's Jacob Wilson. I'm the program director with Pontiac Community Foundation and also the project manager for the Oakland County Regional Housing Partnership. As Ryan said, in 2022, MSHDA completed their first statewide housing plan, which set forth 5 housing targets in the areas of housing production, rental affordability, housing equity, along with other targets and priority areas. And within this document, there were 37 goals, 134 strategies to guide the 17 regions that MSHDA established as their regional housing partners in 2023. So in June of 2023, the Oakland County Regional Housing Partnership was formed with Pontiac Housing Commission, Pontiac Community Foundation, Alliance for Housing, and Community Housing Network, serving as the backbone organizations and members of the steering committee for this work. Go ahead, next slide, Ryan. So within this steering committee, each organization serves as a chair on these various working groups, whether that be working groups to address housing stock and housing affordability issues, preventing and ending homelessness, or communication and education around affordable housing in Oakland County. These working groups work within our action plan, which in total has 6 goals and 30 strategies to help accomplish the goals that are laid out in this plan. And as a part of this agreement with MSHDA, the Oakland County Regional Housing Partnership submits quarterly progress reports, which are publicly available on MSHDA's website. So first, the Preventing and Ending Homelessness Work Group, along with the Communication and Education Work Group, really spent a lot of 2024 folding into work that was already being done by the Oakland County Blueprint to End Homelessness, because there was a lot of overlap between those working groups. So rather than duplicating our efforts, we merged with them to create, between those 2 working groups, over 100 people working to address issues of homelessness and communication and education around that issue. The biggest work this working group is doing right now is creating a centralized data hub of homelessness prevention resources, as well as seeking to launch PEDmission in Oakland County to serve a greater need and create more access for individuals looking for income limited or assisted housing, as well as assist landlords in listing these properties for individuals seeking that service. The Communication and Education Work Group has been hard at work getting the message out about affordable housing. We just wrapped up a 6-part series with Issue Media Group in their Metro Mode arm about affordable housing in Oakland County. And the final story was actually just released a week or 2 ago, which talked about zoning reform and how that can create more equitable housing solutions in Oakland County. We're pursuing a second contract with Issue Media Group to release 11 more stories about affordable housing in Oakland County and continue to raise awareness. Along with this, they've launched a webpage which hosts information not only about the Regional Housing Partnership, but what each individual organization is doing, as well as local, state, and federal housing resources. And along with this, they're working to create a content calendar and a branding guide, which will serve as a cohesive guide for our messaging around affordable housing in Oakland County. And I'll pass it to Vern Gustafson to talk about the work that the Housing Stock Working Group is doing.
Well, thank you, Jacob. Vern Gustafson, project director over at the Pontiac Housing Commission, also serve on the Regional Housing Partnership here in Oakland County, and also a co-lead of the Housing Stock Working Group, which is comprised of some great members in the various housing industry, and it's been very instrumental in moving us forward. As stated, we took a look at in regards to the statewide housing plan in 2022 and noticed that particularly Oakland County, there was what is currently needed right now. We're looking at, or statewide, is 75,000 new and rehabilitated units. Of that, back in 2024, as you recall, Governor Whitmer increased those targets to roughly 116,000 across the state. That was broken down, but then when we took a closer look in regards to the data that was created as part of the plan and understanding the increased target that the governor instated, Oakland County currently needs a little over 20,000 units. That being new and also rehab units. And that's broken down into a series of units, including affordable rental units, that being also market rate, that being for homeowners and also rental. We're looking at home ownership in regards to low and moderate income households. And lastly, a series of units related to workforce housing. Okay, next slide. And what we found is as the working group got started, we found it very important for us to take a look at all the various priority areas and its 7 goals. And what we did was, as a group, we selected 2 top priority goals, that being development and zoning. And from those goals, we identified definitely key performance indicators. That being the first thing we did was we introduced and starting to implement or consider a statewide housing tax credit program. And what's interesting is that it was important that we got the word out to our Oakland County legislators, which we did, and get them to seek interest. And what we're hearing just recently, there has been some momentum at the state through at Michigan, like they are looking at that program and hearing from those legislators, probably not just from Oakland County, but other regions or other regional housing partnerships across the state, that this is something that we need to introduce as in the state of Michigan. Also, what was important is that we wanted to increase a certain number of housing units available for ownership, priced at a certain price point, say of 250,000, and understanding the market the way it is now. It's going to be a daunting task, but we're looking at ways to reduce those housing costs to make it affordable for every resident here in Oakland County. And lastly, was important to spread the word out about, obviously we all understand that there is, a housing shortage, not just in Oakland County, but also across the state and also across the nation. And I think we all understand also, either personally or also professionally in the business that we're in, that there is many contributing factors towards that shortage. That being what we're seeing, obviously, in regards to rising construction and labor costs, which has a increase of, which is increasing certain home values. We're seeing, obviously, recent demographics is showing a growing millennial and Gen Z population, which are at that age point where they're kind of prime home buyer years, and those people are looking for housing. There's also, obviously, there still continues to be this gap between housing and mortgage costs versus median income that we need to figure out. And also the lack of diverse housing options. It seems because of that factor, it really has intensified the competition, which is also driving up prices. And I think what's also important, and we'll talk about this definitely some more in regards to the zoning atlas and also the corridor development strategy, is zoning restrictions. Some communities, not all in Oakland County, they definitely favor more single family home construction and limit development of higher densities development or units within those lower density zoning districts. And in total, I would say that from our standpoint, that being Oakland County Regional Housing Partnership and all of our working groups, our main goal is to change that narrative, to increase those options for all income residents. And I think what was important as part of this statewide housing plan and to talk with others across the state as regional housing partnerships, you know, we started to understand and take a look at in regards to that being a zoning atlas, that being a corridor development strategy for the county. That could be a valuable tool and resource to provide that development and planning for the various housing options for everybody here in the county. With that, I would like to turn it over to Leah. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So as Vern noted, right, there's a variety of factors that are contributing to the difficulties we're having in providing all the housing that we need right now. So we sometimes at MAP refer to it as lumber, labor, land, and laws, and we can't fix all of them, but that last one, laws, definitely has our name on it at the Michigan Association of Planning. So we as an organization have taken that charge really seriously. How can we help planners across the state, communities across the state address their housing issues today? So our board identified way back in 2021 that housing, which is a core planning issue, is a top priority for us. And so we've been working at it both at the board level and in terms of staff work, the things that I do since then. And so I would like to talk to you about a couple of tools that we have produced to really do what we can in our corner of the housing shortage here. So the first thing that I would like to talk to you about is this Zoning Reform Toolkit, which is available in PDF form for free on our website. You can see the link at the bottom there. And so we began work on this back in 2021. It was published in 2022. And the goal really behind this product was to say, okay, you know, what can communities do today to make it easier to build the housing that they need? So, you know, having most housing decisions located at the local level has, you know, there's two sides of that coin. On the one side, it's hard for any community to make a large scale difference, but at the same time, any community can get started immediately. And so we wanted to facilitate that. So in this tool, there are 15 zoning code reforms that go beyond the number of units. So regulatory barriers aren't just the number, you know, it's not just a number. We wanted to take a comprehensive look at what is the whole landscape of regulatory barrier and what can we do to address that holistically. So the toolkit has a couple of parts. The beginning of it really sets the stage and talks about this context that it is just different now than it was. If anyone on this call bought your house more than 5 years ago, the landscape that we are familiar with is just not what it is today. The economics have changed, the dynamics have changed, it's just different. So in the first part of this, we really set the stage. We talk about the data that, you know, informs us of how different it is. We discuss how to talk about and think about housing in this new landscape, because all that is needed if we're going to if we're going to make changes, especially, in the public process. So for each tool, we don't just list the tool, we try to take a comprehensive approach to it. We talk about the rationale for it. What is the tool? Why, if you make that change, will it increase your housing supply, choice, and affordability? What are potential obstacles that you might run into in trying to use each of these tools, and how can you address them? What are the policy supports? This is a planners gathering, so we all know that your regulation shall be based upon a plan. So what is the connection there? What do you need in your policy to support your regulation? And real examples, real language that has been used, that is adopted, is enforced, is guiding policy throughout or is guiding housing production throughout our state. So those tools fell into 3 buckets. Basically, so we talk about the districts. We talk about how having fewer districts, we're kind of got a little bespoke in a lot of our, zoning codes, and have just a lot of small districts that provide very firm, strong, detailed guidance. And the opposite of that is flexibility. So how can we get some more flexibility into our zoning districts? Probably by having fewer of them that are able to do more. And how can we expand our uses? And by that, I do mean adding, say, residential uses into our commercial districts. Our commercial districts have undergone quite a bit of change in the last 5 years or so. Office, commercial, they are just not the environments that they used to be. How can we integrate housing to both support them and to address our housing needs? But then also in our neighborhoods themselves, how can we make them more complete by offering a wider range of contexts that suit everybody who needs to live there? The second bucket is form and context, and that really, in a lot of ways, gets at this affordability that everybody has been talking about. So smaller lots and units are a way to increase the affordability of our homes. When we make those requirements bigger, we make the cost bigger. There's just that's a direct connection, no two ways around that. How can we look at ways to smartly right size our lots and units to what we actually need and what we can afford? And parking, cars take up a lot of space. That space has a cost. And so while certainly many places continue to be drivable contexts and need to accommodate cars, they maybe don't need to give all the space to cars that they currently do. How can we address that? And then the third bucket is processes. So everybody knows that red tape costs money. And if you don't know, then you'll hear it at your planning counter, right? And so what are the ways in which we can still have processes that protect the decisions that we need to make, but also, again, right size that red tape? And we're not talking about any sort of wholesale slashing of anything. We're talking about an incremental approach. So if we have a special land use that has to get elected body approval, is it possible to move that so that it stops at the Planning Commission, which is all that's required by law? If we have a use that the Planning Commission approves as a special land use, is it possible to write standards such that that can be moved to a by right process? If we have by right uses that are routinely being approved without a problem, can we move those into an administrative process? We're just talking about making this easier wherever we can. And then finally, an area that many communities have explored and are interested in is this idea of pre-approved plans, which is where the municipality sort of takes on the burden of looking carefully at what it takes to get from idea to permit. And so those soft costs of design, of construction drawings, of permit attainment, how can the municipality take on more of that burden and make it closer to just a click of a button and then you're ready to go on the development side of it? And what the trade-off there is, what the municipality gets for making that investment, is that at the end of it, you get exactly what you want. You have already made those decisions and you make it easier to get what you've decided that you want. Next slide, please. And then a second tool, so we did the Zoning Reform Toolkit published in 2022, and we took it out to our members across the state and we asked the question, okay, well, this is a book and it's not going to solve any problems by itself. What do you need in your community to make this a reality? What do you need to actually implement these tools? And we heard the same thing all over, which is the same thing that I heard when I was a planning consultant, which is we need the best practices. They're good. We have to have them, but we also need to know how it looks on the ground. Who did this and how did it go? How can we learn from each other and understand like how we get from what's on the page to what is actually guiding development? And so that was the genesis of our Zoning Reform Stories and Studies project. So there is in it a survey of more than 100 communities. We just asked them, which of these 15 reforms are you doing? And then we analyzed the results to find out what kinds of communities are engaging in which of the reforms. It's unlikely that everybody is going to take on all 15, right? They need to be tailored to your needs in your community. And so we got some understanding of what's being used where. And then the biggest part of it and the funnest thing I have done at work, and I don't know how long, is conducting some in-depth interviews with planning decision makers, usually the planning director, but sometimes the planning commissioner, sometimes the chair, sometimes in a little community, if the supervisor is serving as a zoning administrator, it was that person. And we did that with 22 communities of all sizes, types, and regions. That was very important to me personally, to make sure that wherever you are in Michigan, whatever your context is, if you're a big community, little community, a township, a city, a village, that there is a story in there, maybe even two, that you could be like, oh, this really speaks to my context. This really tells me who has done this and how did it go. So 3 of them were from Oakland County that I just like to highlight briefly here. I talked with Novi, who's keeping pace with steady high growth. They have been among the Michigan communities that are growing the most and the fastest for several decade cycles, census cycles running. And the fact that they're providing the housing is definitely related to that, right? So they are keeping pace. And then they also talked about moving from a very traditional use-based commercial, office, residential, separated system in their zoning code to trying out some mixed uses to, as the planner there said, to really supporting one use with another to create the kind of integrated community that good planning knows that benefits us all. In Farmington Hills, we talked about office corridors that, they need rethinking for a variety of reasons, and probably were ready for it even before the big changes to the office landscape happened during the pandemic. And now for sure, it's time to take a fresh look at those. So they're talking about putting new housing in those office corridors to meet 2 goals at once, right? To make good use of that land and also to meet their housing needs, but also discovering along the way that, your housing type is linked to your commercial environment. So if you only have large lot detached homes, there only so many rooftops fit and only certain kinds of retail come. So that also has an impact on who moves to your community. If you want young professionals who are interested in a vibrant nightlife, then you have to provide the vibrant nightlife. And if you're going to provide that, then you have to have the housing that supports it. And so those are the kinds of planning conversations that they're having to figure out how to really turn that boat in a smooth manner. And in Rochester Hills, the conversation was about the evolution of suburban form preferences. So I remember the planning director saying to me that here, really housing diversity has we're talking a lot about the smaller unit size, still detached, but maybe ranches, maybe smaller lot sizes. And, your diversity comes how your diversity comes. No 2 communities are alike. A conversation there was one that I also heard all over the state, which is that if you have predominantly a large lot, large home, single family, that's mostly what your base is, when the folks who have maintained those homes for, decades are ready to move on and to have a smaller unit with less maintenance burden, with less responsibility for that, how can you do that without having to move out of your community, without having to move away from your services, your friends, your neighborhood, your kids, your everybody? So they've had a senior living boom, and as good planners are trying to think ahead as to what is that going to look like when, say, this little bulge passes? How can we make that as flexible as possible to serve our housing needs in the years to come? Next slide, please. And then finally, a tool that we are working on right now that Vern mentioned and that Ryan is going to talk some more about is a zoning atlas. So this is a national project that we are participating in the state of Michigan. We completed a pilot project and rolled it out at the end of last year in September and again in November. Maybe you were at one of those 2 events. And so the idea here is that what the project is reading individual zoning codes and then representing on a single aggregated map what those zoning codes say about what and where housing is permitted. It really, for the first time, illustrates what the aggregated effects of zoning are, which is wild if you think about it, that we don't actually know what that is, right? There's 1,800 municipalities that can zone in Michigan. There are 1,500 that do zone in Michigan, and we have no idea what the aggregated effects of that are. How much land do we use for housing? What kind of housing can we put on it? What does that look like when you add it all up? Are we ever going to be able to meet our housing needs that way? If we need reforms, how do we know where we're starting from? These are all questions that we are attempting to answer here. So as I said, the pilot is complete. Ryan's going to talk a bit about that. The Northwest Michigan region is engaged and ready today to go and get started on understanding what the aggregated effects of zoning are out there. And then Southeast Michigan and West Michigan, including Oakland County, are considering this pretty seriously as a tool that could be beneficial for better understanding of what needs to happen in your regions. And then I'm in chats with a handful more. So we are hoping that by this time next year, we will have several big swaths of Michigan where we have a better understanding of just what's going on with housing there. A couple of findings from our pilot project are at the bottom here. So in our Kent County and Ottawa County and Muskegon County pilot area, we discovered that 80% of residential land allows only single-family homes. That is all that can be built there, and that's what's on the top image there. 70% of all land in those three counties, every square mile, allows only single-family homes. Less than 5% of residential land allows 4 or more units. I think that was a surprise. That was consistent across all three counties, and I did not know that that number was that small. That's true whether you have a special land use. That's true whether it's by right. That is only 5% of residential land on which you can build 4 or more units, and that's what that bottom image shows right there. To me, that's a bit of an opportunity there. The fact that that is such a small number suggests that we really have some room to grow. Even if we got really dramatic and doubled that, that would still be pretty small on our map, and it would represent a vast opportunity in terms of the housing that we need. And then another finding I wanted to share with you is that 84% of the residential districts require 2 or more parking spaces per unit. And again, that includes every district that allows residential. So those are our downtown districts, those are our mixed use districts, those are our dense districts. All of them still continue to require on a strong majority 2 or more parking spaces per unit. And that's appropriate in a lot of contexts, but in many it needs to be rethought, right? That enforces a drivable environment and it precludes a walkable environment. And where we want to make that change, we're going to have to deal with parking. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Kilpatrick, who took these findings from our pilot project, our Zoning Atlas pilot project, and then really leaned in to say, okay, what does this really mean for Kent County going forward?
Thanks, Leah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Kilpatrick. I own Flywheel Community Development Services and work in partnership with both Housing Next and Housing North here on the west side of the state. And we were really excited at Housing Next when Leah and Andrea came to us and said that they wanted to pilot a zoning atlas. It took us a minute to figure out what's a zoning atlas. And as we started to dig into the data that we could get and the level of granularity that we could then process, we immediately started to understand, we know exactly how we can use a zoning atlas. If you don't mind jumping to the next slide. For context, in Kent County, similar to the Oakland County numbers that Vern shared earlier, we know we need about 35,000 additional housing units countywide. That's by 2027. Kent County has been the second fastest growing county in the state of Michigan, only behind Ottawa County, our neighbor to the west. Those 35,000 housing units are broken down fairly similar to Oakland County's, right? We know we need about a third of those units are going to be market rate. A third are going to be that middle income workforce housing that nobody can quite touch with the right tool today. And roughly a third need to be more low and moderate income housing for households earning below 60 or 70% of the median income. But because Kent County's been growing so much, because we continue to add jobs and attract large manufacturers as well as healthcare providers and others, we're anticipating continued growth for the next couple of decades on pace with what we've seen over the last few. And so we're anticipating a need for roughly 70,000 housing units through 2050. So go ahead to the next slide. So what we did is we took the zoning atlas data, uploaded it into our GIS software, and then filtered that zoning atlas data to look at vacant residentially zoned properties. So not just what's allowed today, but what's vacant and allowed today. And what we found is in Kent County, we still have a lot of vacant property, right? That urbanized area around the city of Grand Rapids is fairly well built out, just from sort of like a consumption of land perspective, not from a height and density perspective. But we've still got close to 130,000 acres of vacant land across the county. But the issue when we start to look at zoning is a fewfold. So first, 98.1% of the vacant residentially zoned land is zoned exclusively for large lot single family homes. So on average, we're requiring 1.5 to 1.6 acres per dwelling unit. The median lot width is 78 feet of frontage. A lot of that acreage that is vacant is not currently served by sewer and water. And so we felt like, okay, I mean, technically we've got 130,000 acres, and technically we might be able to build close to 80,000 units, but we're essentially going to destroy the character of Kent County in the process if we're building at 1.5 acre lot sizes across all of that vacant land. We're going to lose our agricultural heritage. We're going to lose a majority of that rural feel. Yep, we'll be spread out, but we're going to create a ton of traffic congestion. It's not an ideal scenario. So that zoning atlas really helped us to understand exactly what the status quo conditions were on the ground and how we needed to start to talk about these to our local municipalities. If you'll go to the next slide. So what we then did is we started to evaluate where in the county do we have sewer and water infrastructure? Where do we have corridors that are already moving a fair amount of traffic? And along those corridors that are served by sewer and water and can handle significant additional traffic, how much underutilized or vacant land do we have along those corridors? And so we evaluated that. We went corridor by corridor. We found 32 corridors in the county that were significantly underdeveloped, but well served by sewer and water and had lots of capacity for additional traffic. And we looked at that underutilized land and we found more than 3,900 acres of vacant land and more than 10,000 acres of underutilized land along those corridors with access to infrastructure. And when we did the math, not using a whole lot of density, typically an average density of about 15 units per acre. So think somewhere between cottage courtyard housing and kind of the high end of missing middle is 15 units per acre. So what we're starting to plan for and talk about with our local municipal partners is what are the various neighborhood types that might work along these corridors. We've got a whole report on the Housing Next website. I'm happy to share that out after this session that illustrates what do those neighborhood types look like. And we're thinking about town centers. So higher density, 3 to 6 story kinds of buildings, depending on the context. Rural areas, it's 3. More urbanized areas, it's up to 6 stories. Densities that might range anywhere from 30 to 50 units per acre in those kind of town center style neighborhoods. Mixed use in some places, right? Ground floor retail, walkable neighborhoods, all the stuff that we know half of the market is looking for right now, but only 3% of the land area actually provides. And then outside of those town centers, we're calling it village residential. And so that's kind of classic townhouse, row house, more compact development, typically not more than 3 stories, but still achieving densities in the 20 to 25 units per acre range. And then another ring around that tends to be more missing middle. Missing middle also kind of extends the corridors between those town center nodes. And that's the housing typologies you're all familiar with. We've been talking about these for years. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage courtyards, all the rest. But then the other thing that we have been talking about with our local municipal partners is taking that 1/4 mile buffer on either side of a corridor and saying we're going to allow small lot single family by right. And what that means is we're going to allow a lot of those single family properties that used to be rural, right? 20 years ago, it was a rural environment and these homes were built on 1 acre lots, but now they're served by a 50-inch sewer pipe and a 24-inch water main. Those 1 acre lots don't make a ton of sense anymore. And they're actually declining in value because they're now 50-year-old homes. They're out of context. They're on a 5-lane strode. And so what we want to start to look at is how do we subdivide those lots to get more cottage courtyards, small lot, single family, more community-oriented neighborhoods that are all walkable to the primary corridor that has the town center, the village residential, where we've got mixed use, all of those kinds of things. So all of that is to say, on less than 4,000 acres, we could get roughly 70,000 housing units, meet all of our needs through 2050, with a fraction of the budget in terms of infrastructure. We don't intend to build any new infrastructure, but there are some places where sewer and water are getting to be 60, 70 years old. And we think it's prudent not to add a lot of density without replacing some of that infrastructure. So we've budgeted that in. Next slide. And I think this might be my last one. So then the last thing that we did is we did a financial analysis, because many of our communities, and there's 2 things that we need to say here. Many of our communities are saying, hey, we're willing to accept some growth, but we really want to keep our small town, suburban or rural character. We don't want urbanism all over the place. We might like walkable neighborhoods in some places, but not everywhere. And we said, okay, that's cool. We can figure that out. But we also have communities that are convinced higher density leads to lower property values. And we knew that was a myth that we needed to dispel. In our plan, we've got a taxable value map. If anybody follows Joe Minakazi or Urban 3, they do these taxable value maps where they show you these big red spikes of taxable value that tend to show up in downtowns and in walkable neighborhoods. So we did a taxable value map in Kent County, and same thing, right? Big spikes, downtown Grand Rapids, that whole East Town, Wealthy Street corridor, big spikes, the village of Ada, big spikes. Everywhere else was flat, right? We're not producing nearly enough taxable revenue to pay for all of the infrastructure that is serving those land uses. And so we wanted to illustrate that in real time. We worked with the city of Kentwood. We found a spot that's close to their city hall. They're kind of master planning this area for town center. It's currently just a strip mall. There are some decent retail uses in there, but it's also about half vacant. And so we took that strip mall and we illustrated a town center. Then we looked at the likely taxable value that would be generated based on the cost of construction and comparable sales in the surrounding region. And what we can show is we can add more than 600 new households with varying housing types and sizes and price points. We can increase taxable value for the neighborhood from 3.4 million to 117 million. You can see we broke that down by the share that would go to the county versus the share that goes to the city of Kentwood. And then we calculated the infrastructure cost. We're not building any new infrastructure to create this neighborhood. This particular neighborhood is fully served, and that infrastructure is probably good for another 50 years. So the ratio of taxable value compared to the cost of infrastructure to serve the neighborhood jumps from 31% to 1,072%, right? So what we're trying to demonstrate here is not only can we build great places that half of the market wants to live in, not only can we build a whole lot more housing without consuming a lot of new land, rather reutilizing older urbanized places, we can also generate a bunch of new tax revenue. Now, the one caveat here is in order to catalyze these kinds of projects on the front end, probably the first 5 to 10 years, we're going to be using brownfield TIF, and we'll probably use some NEZs or commercial rehab incentives, because to catalyze this, we need to demonstrate to the market that the city is willing to invest in this place. We're going to bring the same kind level of infrastructure investment in terms of above ground infrastructure, right? We want sidewalks and bike paths and street trees, the kinds of things that make a place feel like a place. So there's going to be that early 10-year period where we don't see a ton of new tax revenue flowing into the city or the county coffers because we're reinvesting into the development area and into the infrastructure. But after that first 10 years, we start to see a whole lot more tax revenue flowing into the municipality. And it's perfect timing because that's about the point where there gets to be enough density that we're like, all right, we've got to increase services, right? We might need to hire another officer or another fire department staff member. Might need another person over there in City Hall doing admin work. But that tax revenue will more than make up for the additional administrative costs. So I think that's my time. Looks like we've got plenty of time to answer questions. And Vern or Ryan, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, actually, it's me.
Oh,
Great presentation, everybody. Excellent information. Just a reminder to folks, if you have any questions, please send them to me in chat and we'll get them out there. First question, it was a request and it's already been accomplished. Can Jacob provide a link to the RHP webpage? So if you look in your chat, you'll see that link. Next question, is energy efficiency and electrification being prioritized in the housing creation and rehabilitation? High energy burden reduces a household's ability to exit cycles of poverty, so this seems like a great opportunity for co-benefits, creating affordable, healthy, and future-proofing housing. Question for any speaker.
Let me just answer from my perspective. What we've been seeing is that we here at the Housing Commission on a number of innovative housing projects that were in the planning stage. What has been important is to talking with Detroit Edison and Consumers Energy in regards to providing certain type of incentives in regards to energy efficiency, and obviously working with builders and architects to actually build them with those certain features in mind as they move forward. In return, limiting or reducing the costs for those renters or homeowners. What we have noticed in regards to our rental population, with the cost of utilities, that becomes a factor. It's not just the actual rental cost and down payment assistance and so forth. They still are finding themselves burdened with the fact of utilities. So yes, I highly recommend, and we're forging ahead on a number of fronts, both with Consumer Energy and also DTE, to make that instrumental in any project that we have been working on or will be working on.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to chime in? All right. Not a question, but just a point that Leah has posted the myzoningatlas.org link in your chat, so you'll want to check that out. Next question. Here in Troy, many of the elements Ryan Kilpatrick mentioned, taxable value, enhancing school enrollment, impact on infrastructure costs, cannot be considered in decision-making on applications in front of the Planning Commission. Is that ripe for reform?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. And I think there's a way to do this, and Leah, I'll ask you to chime in and fix any mistakes I make right now. I think from the city council and or township board level, setting policy directive, right? Casting a larger vision for the community is really important. And that's beyond the master plan. That's kind of capital improvements planning. That's thinking about what are our infrastructure obligations? How do we support the schools, right? All of those things. And saying, we know we've got to do some things in order to achieve that. The planning process then kind of comes behind the township board or city council's directives and says, okay, we know we've got some broad community missions we need to achieve. We're going to engage the community, figure out how do we do this. But I think setting some constraints is really important to any exercise in design or creation, right? We've got to have a boundary within which we operate. And so I think that having a governing body that is going to articulate on the front end, we're prioritizing the kinds of places that can actually pay for themselves or generate enough revenue over time to do the things that are necessary to serve the community well. And by setting that direction, then it's the Planning Commission's job to figure out, okay, how do we actually plan for this? Now, as it relates to an individual site plan, I'm not sure if you can use your decision-making authority on an individual site plan to determine, well, does it produce enough tax revenue or not? And I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend that. But I think the broader visioning, it's a really important element. So Lee, as the kind of Michigan Planning Enabling Act expert, feel free to, counter anything I just said.
I mean, I don't think there's strong guidance in in any of the acts, but I would say this to agree. So probably at the site plan review scale, that is the wrong scale to be sort of answering that question exactly. But I do think that we planners could do a better job of in the planning process that then, sort of informs everything that comes down the pike after that, of understanding all of the inputs and constraints. I think I mean, I wrote a lot of master plans as a private consultant, and we did not do a lot of considering of the value of development, like an individual development, not each one, but like types of development. Like we did not do a lot of the kind of mapping that he's talking about, the taxable value. We sometimes did, if the community was interested in it, but I would say that sort of as a planner, as somebody who is in the position of really trying to connect the various pieces of the community, the financial aspect and the development aspect and the, infrastructure aspect. We kind of sit at the locus of all of those things, that we could do a better job of understanding what the financial impacts are of development form in general, and allowing those to continue to influence our approach in general, even so that will come through in individual decisions, a basic understanding that, we need certain kinds of density, we want it in certain areas, and we have a financial underpinning for that desire and that policy that will come through in individual decisions. But if the question is like, oh, can there be a checklist for each individual site plan review that says exactly what the impacts are going to be? I'm not sure we can do that. It has to be a little bit further upstream, and I think that it should be.
Okay, excellent. Next question. Can you talk about the demand for walkable neighborhoods? What do you think are the top 2 or 3 types of ordinances or other limits that get in the way of building new walkable neighborhoods? Ryan, you had mentioned the property tax value in walkable neighborhoods. Why do more not get built?
Yeah, great question. Broadly, we're a little bit in the way as planners and our planning commissions in terms of how we set up our regulatory code. If anybody can tell me the root of your original lot area and width requirement, if it's not tied to original plat, I'm really curious to know how you established your lot area and width. Most communities that I've served, it's arbitrary, right? If it's not rooted in the original plat that was done pre-1945, those lot area and width requirements don't mean a whole lot. They were made up. And so oftentimes when we have those large lot areas, 10,000, let's say it's a 10,000 square foot minimum lot area, it's really difficult because I think culturally as Michiganders and as North Americans, we feel like bigger is better. And if we're going to allow something smaller, we're losing something, right? But you're not. If you want to keep a 10,000 square foot lot, great, good for you, do that. But if you want to allow somebody else to live on a 2,500 square foot lot with a smaller cottage because their kids have moved out, they're in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're going to be in Florida for 2.5 months out of the year. They want something small that's easy to maintain. Allow that too. There is nothing that says 2,500 square feet is too small, or frankly, even 1,800 square feet for a lot in a cottage courtyard is too small. And so it's our cultural expectations that have us assuming that, well, everybody needs a large yard and everybody needs 2 covered parking spaces. We've got to recognize, no, that's what you want, and that's totally fine. You should have that if you want it. But let's not force our perspective on everybody who comes into our community. And we have to be able to think about, okay, and as planners, we're always very good at this. We'll think about every potential negative consequence of a code decision, right? Well, I don't know where everybody's going to park. We got to solve for the, Christmas parade where everybody's going to have to park on this street for 4 hours on one day out of the year. We don't have to solve everybody's problems all the time in the zoning code. Sometimes stuff comes up and we figure it out on the fly. And this is the point of having a nuisance ordinance. So that was the really important thing that Suzanne and I baked into the Zoning Reform Toolkit, is recognizing what should be regulated in your zoning code and what should be regulated in your nuisance code, so that, stuff is going to come up. You're going to have neighbor disputes. You're going to have things where somebody parked in the wrong spot. Deal with that under the police power ordinances as a nuisance violation. Don't embed it into your code, assuming that you've got a one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, excellent. This question is for, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Leah.
Very
Sorry.
shortly to that, which is, I just want to tag on to that another of the assumptions that you just got to work around with the walkability that gets in the way is that right now, the way we do things, there are ways in which walkability and drivability are sort of mutually exclusive. And it is almost impossible to just ditch the car without then putting some real thought into how that circulation is, as Ryan said, how that circulation is going to work in the walkable context. So not just making it, sort of a nuisance, but like places that you can't walk to, how are you going to get there? Where are you going to put some cars? How is the biking and walking infrastructure going to be made safe enough that you actually can use it? Like, it's not enough to just make the density. If you just do that, but then don't sort of make the other walkable portions of it work and acknowledge that there's going to be some driving, that's what makes it so hard to get it to be appealing and repeated.
And if I may, Leah, if I can interject, I think what's also important is, and what I've been finding in over the years, is also that making sure that your master plan, in regards to if it needs to be updated, you really need to talk about capital improvement programs, and not have the DPW and the city engineer kind of evaluate it and make their own decisions. That we talk to them as planners and community urban designers to kind of meld the two together. So they do have that 5-year capital plan that really does talk about infrastructure, talks about public realm type of improvements that are needed in certain areas. So the venture is that then that community can budget for it to make those private or make those proper investments in the future.
Next question for Lee and Ryan. Have you shared the findings of the Zoning Atlas pilot with the Rapid? If corridors of redevelopment opportunity can be aligned with the transit network, parking requirements can be reduced even further and greater benefits can be realized. I'd love to see this happen here in Oakland County.
Yes, we are working very closely with the Rapid. They're updating their transportation master plan right now. And we're aligning all of our mapping in GIS. They just sent over a request a couple of weeks ago. They wanted to understand what were we projecting as potential growth along the Plainfield corridor, because they're planning the route and level of service based around long-term growth projections that we're creating. And so to the point, right, what we're trying to do is figure out how do we get enough density along those corridors to support high frequency transit so that people can start to make transitions to other modes of travel if they want to. And the Rapid, I think historically has been a social service that is kind of the option of last resort, because our environment is designed around the car. And getting off the bus and walking the last quarter mile to your destination isn't pleasurable in most places. We're now trying to work together with our municipalities and the Rapid to say, let's make the experience of taking the bus and then getting off the bus and getting to your final destination better than your experience of driving a car. We want it to be faster, we want it to be more convenient, and we want it to be healthier for you as an individual. It's going to take time, right? Like, this is why we're projecting out to 2050, but we want to be casting that vision and bringing people along with us to see, oh yeah, actually, there are a fair number of trips that I could take by both bike and bus and would be fine leaving my car at home for some of those.
Okay. Lee, did you have any?
Nope.
Okay. Are there some newer examples of successful town centers with mixed developments, as Ryan mentioned, in existence in Michigan? What have partnerships with planning departments and developers look like in these types of town center developments?
Well, the first one I'm going to name is right here in Kent County, and it's a little bit of an anomaly. The village of Ada really just sprang up out of nowhere in the last 6 or 7 years. Anybody who's spent time in West Michigan or was originally from West Michigan, Ada always had a little historic village that was mostly one-story buildings that were kind of attached. It's a very cute little main street. But then adjacent to that, there were a couple of strip malls. There was a McDonald's. There was an old kind of defunct grocery store. And the village of Ada is where the Amway Corporation is headquartered. They were having a hard time attracting top talent. They're a little bit removed from the city of Grand Rapids as they were trying to pull in global talent to come live in West Michigan. They heard over and over that people liked the quality of life in West Michigan, but missed having a walkable urban environment near their place of work. So the Amway Corporation and a couple of the families associated with it built a brand new town center. 1,500 new residential units. A hotel was just completed. I think there's close to 75,000 square feet of new retail. All of it's doing really, really well. Highly walkable, urban-oriented neighborhood, includes duplexes and missing middle, as well as townhomes, apartments, condos. It's all expensive, right? None of it right now is affordable. But part of what it's proving is there is a high degree of demand for that product type, and people are willing to pay more for smaller units on less land in order to be close to the things they want to be close to.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Hi, thanks for the great session. We have struggled with getting the community to accept other than single family density. They come to planning commission meetings for anything else in force to protest even senior housing. Are there any tips to increase acceptance of the D word?
Well, I'll say this, that the folks, even though there are a lot of them in that room at one time, I bet you that that is still a pretty small portion of your entire community. And so I have just been encouraging communities strongly to really take a step back and to look at your housing needs as a whole. And I'm going to name 4 groups that are probably not at that meeting, that if you can reach out to them, if you can get them there, if you can understand their needs better, it might balance out the conversation. And so one are your young folks, people who have not bought a house ever, or certainly not, it wasn't a long time ago. So the people that are having to move out of their community, out of their family, away from the place that they would really like to live and have their connections, I would encourage you to sort of get a hold of that group and understand their needs as well as you understand this particular group's. The second group are the folks that I mentioned during my presentation that are on the other end, that have maintained, these homes for however many years, however many decades, and now would like to have a lower maintenance burden, but cannot do that again without moving out of their community, without moving away from their retail services, all the things that I just said. That's another one. And then the third group are if you have industry in your community and they're looking to expand, I would encourage you to understand the needs of your employers, of your growing employers in particular. Many of them say that they are having a really hard time expanding in any way, which affects the health of your community, economic health of your community, without some variety in housing type, because all those single family widespread homes are already full, right? And then the third group are the employers that are already in your community, that are serving your cute little downtowns, that are your service workers, that are creating the vibrancy that is the reason that people like your community so much. All of those groups are not as likely to show up to your planning commission meeting, but they are there and they have needs and they profoundly affect your community. And so if you can, I'm not saying to discount anybody, I'm saying to balance out the conversation and to understand that a certain group of folks comes to you and that 7 o'clock on Tuesday meeting format works for them, but that might not be representative of the housing needs of your community, and that it's your job as leadership to get that fuller view.
Well said.
Okay. 2 final questions. Can the speakers talk a little bit more about current plans and programs in Michigan for careful targeting of water and wastewater infrastructure to promote housing development?
I don't know about statewide. Do you have anything on the west side, Ryan?
Jim, will you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Can the speakers talk a little bit more about current plans and programs in Michigan for careful targeting of water and wastewater infrastructure to promote housing development?
Yeah, well, so we're actually having this conversation up north in the Traverse City, Leelanau-Benzie area right now. We've done some similar work to evaluate both their housing needs and to understand where do they have existing infrastructure. In those markets, they don't have a lot of existing infrastructure. And yet they still need about 25,000 additional housing units across a broader multi-county region. And so Yarrow Brown at Housing North is really working through with some of those communities, figuring out where do we have existing infrastructure that just has capacity issues, and what's necessary to expand the capacity? What's it going to cost? How much revenue will we need to produce, or how many users are we going to need to justify that infrastructure expansion? But then also, where do we have some places that are starting to grow and don't have sewer and water, but probably need it? And so what does it look like to start planning for a new wastewater treatment plant in one of these towns? Think about the Village of Empire in the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore area. They have had a fair amount of growth recently. They've got local business owners who want to expand. There's a brewery that really wants to be downtown Empire, but there's no wastewater treatment plant. And so they're beginning to evaluate, again, what does it cost to build a facility? What's the appropriate size for the community? And how do we scale it in a way that you can make the debt service payments early, knowing that you're going to have to grow to a certain level of density in order to justify the costs over time. So this is kind of capital improvement planning 101. It's understanding what are your growth projections, what's your revenue going to be, what can we afford to build in the short term, and how do we think a little bit long term without overbuilding.
Okay, and then final question right at 11 o'clock. A prior question discussed energy efficiency. Is the Michigan planning community aware of educating its members and helping developers utilize My Sustainable Financing Law, commercial property assessed clean energy, or CPACE? CPACE provides financing for renewable energy, adaptive reuse, updating old infrastructure, and providing needed capital on projects.
I would say that that is not top of mind. So I heard planning, so I just popped in here. I would say that it's not at the top of our, sort of conversations that we're having right now. I would love to have more information about it. Energy planning does not, sort of regrettably, is not as embedded into zoning as one might like. And so it's just not something that touches our wheelhouse as much as we might like it to, but finance certainly does. So I saw you pop on. Vern, do you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and I touched it briefly in regard to talking about Detroit Edison and consumer energy, but also I think it's from a standpoint of actually from the building and the construction side, I think it's important that as we are trying to provide energy efficient units and talking with certain contractors and builders, that we from my perspective, in the arena of actually building units, that we should find the right individuals and to build these units, and also inform them if they haven't already about these programs. So I would like to hear more, definitely.
Okay, excellent. That's the end of the questions. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Ryan?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd really thank you, all of you, for joining us. Leah, Brian, Vern, and Jacob. Excellent presentation this morning, as Jim said. Thank you for being here, providing your insights and expertise. And also just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. A reminder, we have 2 upcoming planners gatherings. One's on March 18th, Water Resource Commissioner's Office. We'll discuss new soil erosion control and stormwater standards. And then on March 20th, we're going to have folks from Oakland County Business provide an overview of Oakland County Business Loan Program. So again, thanks for being here today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If